Welcome to Learning Photography with Duck. Here's your host, Duck.
Okay. All right. Time once again for another edition of Learn Photography with Duck. As always, I am your host, Duck. Thank you for joining me. Here it is, getting late into season to December. Christmas is literally right around the corner. So I know most of you probably have better things to do than hang out with me. So so I appreciate it. There was something I wanted to. I made a little update on my little Zoom chat thing here. Um, I added the ability. All right, so typically when I do these, I rely on you guys to turn your microphones on and be able to ask questions directly. But I've noticed in the past that there have been some people that either one are hesitant to ask openly with the mic, or because they have some kind of technical problem, they can't, so they send it over through the chat. The problem is most of the time when I am doing my lessons, I'm actually looking at you through a lens. So most of my attention tends to be through the lens, and I'm not really paying attention to what's going on around. So I said, well, wouldn't it be nice to be able to monitor the chat without having to do this all the time? So I played around and I added a little uh did I let me see, do I have it set up properly? Here we go, chat. Oh, there's nothing in the chat, that's why. So if you add something, this is a test, and I send it, ta-da, it shows up on the screen. And I'm hoping that at least, excuse me, at least if I see it in my face like that, I'll be able to respond to it. So uh, we'll play around with it, see if it works. If it doesn't, if it becomes a problem, well, the hell with it. So anyway, before we get started, again, this is Photoshop edition, but before we get started, let's just go over very quickly what's coming up. If you are, if you're a member of Meetup and you subscribed to Milford Photos Meetup group, you probably should have gotten a little message saying that we're doing a little get together, a little photo walk down on the Milford Green on Wednesday, starting around 5 o'clock, just to kind of photograph the Christmas lights. Unfortunately, we have no snow. It would have been nice if there was some snow, but at least, it'll give you a chance to play around with low light photography and being able to balance out between the low light and the Christmas lights and things like that. And of course, Milford Photo usually does a pretty nice job decorating their big tree down on the green, as well as the gazebo and, a lot of the peripheral trees there. So if you're interested, Wednesday, we're getting together at around 5 o'clock. The write-up says we're going to meet at Milford Photo and then walk over, but if you don't want to do that, just meet us on the green. We'll be getting there eventually. So if you have nothing to do Wednesday night, feel free to come out and join us. The CTPPA is doing a little Zoom event where we kind of just get together and share ideas and share Photoshop resources in the form of brushes and textures and things like that. So if you're interested, it's going to be a Zoom event on the 20th from 8 to about 9:30. If you are interested, go to the ctppa.com website in order to register for that. And once again, talking about Milford Photo, I am going to be giving a talk that I've done in the past. It's called Beyond the Rule of Thirds. It goes into a little bit more of kind of like the emotional and the psychological reason for certain compositional rules. It delves a little bit into the psychology of how we as humans look at and analyze and view photography, or actually, visual arrangements in general. So this is used a lot by graphic designers, painters, anybody into visual arts. And of course, being a photographer, we are into visual arts. So understanding some of these quote unquote rules can help strengthen your photographic compositions, and not only just create something in your camera just because it kind of looks good, but really understand why you're using that particular type of composition. And when you understand the why, it kind of helps you a little bit more with the motivation of creating an image specific to a desire that you want. You want to convey a particular emotion. You want to, strengthen your composition. It's not so much, here's the rule of thirds, put it on one of these points of interest, and you're done. We go into the into the weeds with, why. And we talk about other alternative grids and layout elements besides just the basic rule of thirds. So that's going to be in January, on January 23rd, which is a Tuesday, starting at 6:30. It's going to be a Zoom event, so you don't have to worry about going out in the weather. You can just sit at home in the comfort of your home and watch the event. But you do have to sign up through Milford Photo's meetup group. So just go to meetup.com, Milford Photo, and register through there. Okay? That's pretty much what I got coming up. Anybody want to mention anything going on in your area? No? Okay. All right. So I did a presentation for the North Haven Camera Club, and I want to publicly thank Bob, who's here tonight, and of course Bill, who's not here, for supporting me on during the event. I appreciate you guys. We had a pretty good turnout. It was a great presentation, and we got some really, really good interaction with the crowds. So, and of course, I picked on Bob a little bit. You didn't mind, right, Bob? I didn't think.
No, I'm old. It doesn't bother me.
All right. Well, I really appreciate you being there. All right. So what I have today is we're going to look a little bit on doing a black and white conversion. Okay. And, right now I have this particular image opened up in Lightroom because as you guys know, I pretty much start, well, not pretty much, I always start all my editing process in Lightroom first. Simply because Lightroom has all the same how would I describe it? I don't think I've ever had to describe it. All the same preliminary editing tools that Photoshop does as far as the Adobe Camera Raw. So a lot of times if you're doing a photo edit and you're not using Lightroom, one of the things that's suggested is when you open up a raw file in Photoshop, it automatically opens it up in Adobe Camera Raw, and it suggested that you do a lot of the preliminary editing in Adobe Camera Raw simply because it's really a lot faster to do it there than to try to do it with layers after the fact. So you guys heard me say that, for my editing process, the first thing I do to all my edits before I even get into any kind of creative editing is that I normalize all my images. And what that means is it's, making sure that your horizon is straight. If you're doing architectural photography, make sure your uprights are, straight. Doing a little bit of exposure balance, doing a little bit of color balance, set your white point. For example, with exposure, you might want to set your white and black points and things like that. So because I use Lightroom to organize all my images and I import everything into Lightroom first, I always start in Lightroom because Lightroom is basically Adobe Camera Raw. So the nice thing is that I'll do all my preliminary editing in Lightroom. I'll even do some of the advanced editing in Lightroom, and whenever there's anything within Lightroom that Lightroom cannot handle, then I'll port it out to Photoshop. But, because today is Photoshop Monday, I decided, well, oftentimes, for those of you who don't really use Lightroom a lot, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pretty much do this in Photoshop. So I have this particular image of Chatham Falls, and you saw me a while back do an edit from the same shoot where I kind of brought out a lot of the color. Let's see. What is this? Oh, that's my copy. So this was the original that I took out in the scene, and this is pretty much the editing that was done. And it was all done in Lightroom. So this particular image is from the same session, and actually, this is the same session. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to port this over to Photoshop and do a black and white conversion in Photoshop. So let me go over to, where's my Photoshop? Here we go. All right, but before we do that, what I want to do is just have a quick warning when it comes to dealing with color in Photoshop. In the sense that usually what you'll see as a nice contrast in color often fails when you do a black and white conversion. All right, hold on, give me 1 second. Where is my... I'm getting a ghost here on my... There we go. Much better. Okay, so in this particular example, let me go ahead and make it a little bit larger, take up the screen. I have contrasting colors. Okay. And you guys heard me say in the past that if you really want to enhance the wow factor of an image, you want to really boost a lot of the contrast, the visual contrast between different elements in your image. And the contrast can be just about anything. It can be contrast between light and dark. It can be contrast between smooth and rough. It can be contrast and scale between small and large, left and right, up and down, all kinds of things. And it doesn't necessarily have to be large, big, global contrast. It can be, you know, on a smaller scale. And often it's those little contrasts that can really elevate an image. So in this particular case, we have a good, strong contrast between this kind of purple color and this green color. Because if we were to look at a color wheel, they're kind of on opposite sides of the color wheel. And I don't believe I have my color wheel set up here. Ooh, give me 1 second. Let me see if I can get.
Excuse me, sir. You have a new message.
Oh, get my color wheel. Give me 1 second. Where's my color wheel? Color wheel. There it is. And camera settings. I'll copy.
The one above you, Duck, with the triangle sort of shows off where the contrast is. Now they're right across from each other. The triangle above you on the screen.
Oh yeah. Duh. Yes. You're right. But let me get a slightly bigger one. I do have one ready. It's not ready for this screen. So, all right, here we go. Okay, so color wheel. Is it gonna do it? It's not gonna do it. Never mind. Okay. Guess it's not gonna work for me. But all right, so what we'll do is we'll just take this and we'll see if we can enlarge it. Okay. Yeah, there we go. All right, so if we look at the color wheel, the outer ring represents the hue or the color or the true tone color of an object. And if we look, we have we're kind of like in this realm of our purple. And then the green is on this side. So they're complete opposites of each other. You cannot get a stronger contrast between two colors than opposite of each other. Okay? But, let me put this back here. Oh, come on. Dock, will ya? Dock. Doesn't want to dock. Okay. Doesn't want to dock properly. There we go. But if I were to take this and put a black and white conversion layer over it, all right, so basically all you got to do is just come here, this black and white circle here. These are all your effects layers, okay? Halfway down, we have the black and white, and it's going to convert everything to black and white. And all of a sudden, you notice that when we remove the color, as opposite as those two were, the contrast is suddenly gone. Okay? So that gives you an indication that just because you're seeing contrast in color does not mean that that contrast is going to carry over to black and white. So oftentimes what you'll need to do is kind of keep in mind what the colors are underneath. All right, and it doesn't matter if you're working in Photoshop like here, or if you're working in Adobe Camera Raw, or if you're working in Lightroom. Whenever you convert something over to black and white, you're going to get a color mixer, which is kind of bizarre considering that, you know, we're getting rid of color. Okay, but the color mixer allows you to manipulate the underlying color below the effect in order to manipulate that contrast. All right, so we know that the two halves that we have here, this one was purple and this one was green, correct? All right, so now if I were to take the, and by the way, all these settings is the default setting for this layer, layer adjustment. But if we were to take the green slider, all right, you'll notice that to the left of the slider, it gets darker, and to the right of the slider, it gets lighter. So we're playing around with the luminosity of the color, the underlying color. So now, okay, let me turn this off for a second. We have to make a decision on our part is, do we want the green to be lighter or darker than the purple? Well, if we think about it logically, we would assume that the green would be lighter, because when we look at these two colors, we kind of automatically assign the value of darker to the purple and lighter to the green, because that's kind of how we're perceiving it. Even though in actuality, when we take the color away, they're both the same brightness, okay? So we can say, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and lighten up that green in order to start increasing the contrast between the purple and the green, all right? And we can, you know, the closest thing is we have is the magenta, although there is blue in there, okay? But we can manipulate either one of these sliders to also increase or decrease the contrast in the purple, all right? As well as the yellow slider, because, you know, hopefully you guys understand by now that green tends to have a lot of yellow in it, okay? So keep this principle in mind whenever you do any kind of conversion to black and white, because what you'll want to do is you'll want to manipulate the underlying color in order to kind of increase the contrast of the underlying colors, okay? Any questions on this example? Okay. All right. So,
Doug,
yeah.
not specifically on this one, but I've noticed that I've been seeing a lot of black and white Photoshop courses flying by me in Facebook lately.
Oh, yeah.
And, and they all say, you know, how to bring out all the intensity, you know, because they're drab otherwise. And I don't know if they're starting with black and white, but is this part of what these folks might be teaching, is these kinds of things here that
Probably. When it gets to into black and white conversions, you have to understand, first of all, that the raw materials that we're working from, even though technically we're dealing with the underlying black and white channels in both, in all three channels, the red, the green, and the blue. Okay, remember, if you think back to my trick question, does your camera take color pictures or black and white pictures? All right, and the answer, of course, is it takes black and white pictures. All right, a camera cannot doesn't understand color. All right, because what it's doing is it's reacting to the intensity of light. All right, and the intensity of light is going to be different depending on what color is being reflected back into the camera, as well as how strong that light source is. Okay, but it's not like the camera says, oh, this pixel is receiving green, therefore I'm going to make it green. It doesn't understand that. All it says is it's got this brightness value, and I'm going to record this brightness value. So in order to overcome that issue, some very smart people a long time ago says, hey, if we take a black and white image and we block out all but the blue light, and we do that with two others, one that blocks out all the red light and one that blocks out all the green light, what we get is three separate black and gray images that each pixel is going to have a slightly different value that when calculated together is going to give us a value that represents a color. Okay? And that's how, our Photoshop and Lightroom, that's how it represents colors, by the RGB values, okay, with all the different filters. So when we go into, say, for example, we want to brighten up a green, okay, if we say, okay, whatever is green in my image, I want to brighten it up. We go to the green channel, and if we brighten up those pixels that represent green, we're going to start lightening up the value of green. But it's not quite that simple, because like I mentioned earlier, there is also a lot of yellow in green, okay? But we don't have a channel that represents yellow. When we look at the RGB, there is no yellow channel. We have red, green, and blue. But if we think about the blue channel, the blue is opposite of yellow. So if we add blue, we're taking yellow away. And if we add blue, we're taking yellow away. So it's this kind of like seesaw effect. All right. So now if we want to manipulate green that has yellow in it, we're going to be manipulating the green channel as well as the blue channel in order to modify what we label as green. Okay. So the nice thing about programs like Photoshop and Lightroom is that we don't have to worry about the math behind it. All we got to do is go to a particular slider, move the slider, and try to get the effect that we want. But having an understanding of the underlying structure allows you to target the specific slider that you need to manipulate. Okay, but if we, let me bring this back. If we go to this layer, the layer effect, the black and gray layer effect, all right, we see that we have red, green, and blue. Okay, let me go red, green, and blue, which represents our RGB value, RGB, okay? But in between, we have our magenta, our cyan, and our yellow, okay, which represents our CMY channels, which are opposites of each other. But on this particular um, um, tab here, the black and white conversion, okay, it separates it for us. It allows us to manipulate one or the other kind of independently. So the nice thing is, again, we don't have to worry about all the math that goes into this problem. All we got to do is say, okay, this is what I want to target. This is what I need to move. All right. Now, over time, you're going to notice that there are certain sliders that you're going to manipulate more than others. So, for example, if you do landscape photography, all right, obviously anything that has green, you're going to be manipulating the green and the yellow channels a lot. And if there's sky, you're going to be manipulating the cyan and the blue a lot. But if you do things with people, right, what you're going to find is that you're going to be manipulating the red and yellow sliders a lot, all right, in order to really control your underlying colors, okay? And some sliders, you might even have an orange slider, all right? So if you go into like Lightroom, let me see, let me go into Lightroom. Okay, we go into our black and white. Okay, you're gonna notice that it's a little bit, it's almost the same, all right? We have our red, our green, and our blue, which is our RGB, okay? And we have magenta, aqua, which should be cyan, and yellow, all right? So we have our CMY, okay? But we also have purple and orange available to us. So these are two additional channels that are not present in Photoshop when we look at, you know, the black and white conversion there, okay? So there's a little bit more finesse in Lightroom and subsequently in Adobe Camera Raw, because Adobe Camera Raw has this very same ability, okay? So when it comes to manipulating certain tones, like skin tones, what I find is that for skin tones, I tend to manipulate the orange and the yellow a lot more than anything else, okay? All right. Here we go. All right, so typically when I do a black and white conversion, the first thing I want to do is kind of determine, just like whether you're working with a color image, what is the subject? Where is my point of focus? Where do I want the viewer's eye to go in this particular image? All right. And in this particular image, I want the viewer to go to the waterfall. Okay. Because this is the most interesting part of this entire image. All right. And if possible, maybe have the eye kind of travel downwards. All right. So if we look at this particular image, we notice that if we squint, if we do the squint test, okay, we have a lot of competition in the sky. All right. So we have this triangle of sky above that kind of mirrors the triangle of the waterfall. Okay. And because this triangle of the sky butts up against our upper part of our frame, it's very easy to come in here and travel outside of the frame, which is what I don't want. I want the viewer eye to come into the frame and stay within the frame. Where do I want them to stay within the frame? Well, preferably in this area here. All right. Will the viewer explore other areas? Oh, absolutely. I want them to kind of explore, these little areas here because there is interest, and it informs the viewer about the location, what time of day it was, what's going on in the image, the whole 9 yards. So it's not like I want to completely obliterate those areas, but what I don't want is the viewer's eye to continue out of the frame. I want something there to make them turn around and come back in to explore other areas. All right, so this is very basic information about, keeping the visual interest within the frame. All right. So by analyzing this, we notice that, literally this whole corner up here is very, very bright. All right. In relation to our main subject, which is what we want, is the waterfall. Okay. So this becomes a problem area that we need to make sure that we lower the light value in that area. Okay. Then if we do the squint test, we see that there's a dark area kind of like in this area here, and to some extent here and here. All right, which isn't too big of a problem, but there's a lot of contrast here. Okay. And from experience, I know that as I work the image to kind of boost the contrast a little bit more, this contrast is going to get wider and wider and wider. Okay. So I want to make sure that this area doesn't fall into too dark where I lose any kind of detail. Okay. And the other problem that I'm seeing is that this part of the darkness here kind of bisects the flow of the waterfall coming down. All right. So we have all this light area here, okay, which is where I want the eye to initially go. But like I said, I want the eye to travel down and around. So by default, by the nature of the subject itself, our eye is going to come down and want to travel along this path of the waterfall. All right. And we have areas of brightness here and here that will help pull the eye to those areas. But for some reason, we have this area of darkness that is now cutting it in half. Okay. So I will want to take this and brighten it up so that it bridges the gap. Okay. It bridges the gap. Make sense? All right. Then we have a lot of mid-tone values going on. All right, or actually just slightly under mid-tone values. Okay. We have this whole area of rock and this big area of rock that kind of work to pull the eyes out. So I want to make sure that I tackle that by allowing the eye to come back in. All right, and how do we do that? We create some kind of roadblock here that returns the eye. And usually it's going to be with a little bit of burning. All right, so that all these bright areas now get darker, and then we want to return back to the lighter areas. Okay, So if we were to mark this up, we're definitely going to burn down this upper corner. We're going to burn down the sky. We're going to dodge this area here under the rock. We're going to dodge this area of water here. We're going to burn down this corner, burn down this edge, okay? And we have this kind of like a big area of lightness. I'm probably going to burn down this corner here as well. All right, so what does that look like? Well, the whole center is going to be brighter than the outside. Make sense? Because now if we're looking at all these arrows of what we want to obtain with our image, we see all the outside parts we're going to darken and the inside part we're going to lighten. All right. So that kind of maps out what we want to do light-wise with our image. Okay. And then now if we look at the texture, because the texture is going to be another aspect of this image that we want to manipulate. I purposely dragged the shutter on this in order to give a more smoother look to the waterfall. All right, so as the waterfall comes down, I left the shutter open a little bit longer in order to kind of smooth out that flow rather than freezing the individual water droplets in place. Okay, but I didn't leave it to the point where it became so smooth that it looked like silk. All right, that really silky water effect. All right. So because of that, if we look, there is actually a lot of texture going on in the waterfall itself. We have these kind of like long strands of water interrupted by strands of shadow. So that light, shadow, light, shadow, light, shadow stringiness creates a certain amount of texture. So that tells me that if I were to do a global texture enhancement on this, I'm going to lose the contrast of texture between the water, which is what I want to do, and the surrounding rock, because the surrounding rock already has a lot of texture to it. Okay? And as a matter of fact, what I probably want to do is really just increase the texture. All right. So if I want this area here to be smooth, in order to really contrast against the smooth part, I want to abut that with rough texture. So I want to maybe these areas really pump up the texture a little bit more. Okay, so we want to rough it up, bring out the local texture in these areas that frame the water. Okay, makes sense? All right, we're working with contrast. So if we want smooth water, and we want that to really read as smooth, I'm going to put it up against something that's a little bit rough. Okay. And fortunately, you know, rock is a perfect subject for showing that rough detail. Okay. All right. And the last thing that every edit takes is, you know, editing the color. But in this case, we're not going to be bothering with that because we're going to be doing a black and white conversion. So that eliminates the color aspect from this particular edit. Okay. All right. So now that we have a plan, All right. Excuse me. The first thing I did was I did a black and white conversion. All right. And actually, you know what? Let me just do this fresh. I'll just take these and I'm gonna delete those. Delete those. All right, we'll start fresh. So we go to our little black and white circle here. These are all our layer effects. And like I said, halfway down is the black and white conversion. And it's going to open up this panel and it's going to give us kind of the default settings. All right. Let me see if we can move this in a little bit here. There we go. Okay. So if we look, as soon as we remove the any kind of color, we notice that we've lost a little bit of the contrast that the color gave us. Okay, so up here in this corner, all right, we can see these green bushes that kind of sprinkle throughout there. So it gives us a little bit of information about what's in that corner, okay, as well as this vegetation that is on the side of the rock. All right, that gives us a little bit of interest in the forms of color. But as soon as we get rid of that color, you'll notice that we lost the bushes, completely gone. There's no contrast there. The trees kind of went a little bit on the dark side. This one here just completely got lost. All right. So any interest that was there is now suddenly gone. So now we have to worry about putting some of that interest back in. All right. So for this, we can start around and play with these sliders. All right. So we know, like, for example, in our sky, there wasn't a lot of blue, obviously. All right. If we look at it, there's not a lot of blue, but there is a little bit. All right. So maybe if we darken up the blue slider, all right, it'll do something. Okay. And not very much in the sky. If we look up and all we got are these kind of like two little areas, but behind the bushes or behind the trees up here, all right, what I want you to do is take a look at this area up here and you'll notice that it's had the most impact there. Okay. So if we were to brighten it up, it creates a point of focus where our eye wants to go explore that. All right. But I don't want that. I want the eye to come back. So I'm going to go ahead and darken down that because it also darkens down a little bit here. Okay. The rock also contains a lot of red. All right. So we can take that red slider, all right, and if you toggle it back and forth like this, you can see exactly what it's going to target. Okay. And what I want you to pay attention to in particular is this tree and this tree that once we got rid of the green, we kind of lost. Okay. But if we brighten up those areas of red, now we're starting to get a little bit of a separation where the green is. All right, so it's allowing that green to come back in. So that's something we can play around with. All right, remember, even though we're looking at black and white, we're dealing with the underlying color. All right. All right, and let's see, the yellow. Yellow, kind of does a little bit. Okay. And green, Ooh, green. Maybe if we tone down the red and the yellow, and we bring up the green, okay, that might work. All right. So here it is. It's just, and the cyan's just touching the sky. And magenta, really nothing in the image that fits into magenta scale, so that we can leave alone. All right. So if we toggle back and forth, now we can see that we kind of brought some of this local contrast back into play. Okay. But this one layer effect by itself is not going to fix the issue. All right. All we've done is manipulate the underlying color in order to affect some kind of change in the black and white layer. Now, one way we can that this is a little bit beneficial over something like Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw is that we have the ability to use masks and do more of a local adjustment within Photoshop. All right, so let me turn this off. I'm going to go ahead and create another one. Oh, wrong one. Black and white. Okay. And I'm going to say, you know what? I'm just going to target the rock here on this side here. I want to target that. Okay. So I know that maybe I want to brighten it up, bring out the yellows a little bit. If there's any greens. Okay. So now if we toggle that off, we can see that we're getting some good contrast. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the mask, go to my mask, which now it's white. I do Control or Command I to invert it. All right. Select a nice big soft round brush, and with white as my foreground color, I can go ahead and paint this in with those adjustments. Okay. All right. And I don't know if I want to do the upper sky, so I'm going to do X to bring back black. That's my foreground color, and leave the sky out. So I just want to target the rock here on the side. Okay. And maybe I'll do this one as well because it shares a lot of the same features. So I'm going to bring this in. All right. And maybe this one here in the foreground too. Okay. This area here is a little bit different. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new one, black and white. All right. And in this case, instead of brightening my reds, I want to see about darkening my reds, and maybe even, let's see, what's it doing to my greens? Okay. So now if I toggle that off, okay, what I'm doing is I'm trying to create a little contrast, color contrast, using color, a little contrast in the that upper, what you call it, the upper left quadrant here. All right, I'm just looking at this. Okay, I'm not looking at anything else. Okay, and that looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and Control Command I on my mask. Get my brush, white as my foreground color, and I'm just going to paint that whole corner there. Okay. All right, and you know what? I can probably paint the rest of the water because that looks like it did a decent job. Okay, Good. So between those two black and gray conversions, I got pretty much the majority of my image. Okay. Now the thing you need to worry about is make sure that you're not leaving any holidays in your mask, because you don't want any color coming through. All right. Simply because these masks are targeting different areas and they're not really designed to overlap each other, because a black and white layer over another black and white layer, it's just not going to do anything. Okay, so I want to make sure that, because these are targeting very specific independent areas, all right, I want to make sure that when the two combined, it's going to cover everything. Hopefully that made sense. Okay, so there's that one, there's that one. Okay, so all I got left is my sky. So, oops, go to the top, click black and white, and my sky is just my blue and maybe even a little bit of the cyan. All right. There's really, oh, there's a little bit of yellow in the clouds, so maybe we'll bring down the yellow. Any magenta? No, nothing. Okay. So that gives me a little bit of contrast up in the sky. Again, Control I to invert my mask. And with white as my foreground color on my brush, I'm just going to go ahead and paint in the sky. So between all three layer effects, I've now converted my entire image to black and white, and I've targeted the underlying color slightly different in all three. Okay, so it seems like a lot of work. All right, and yeah, it is. And more often than not, you can do a lot of this in Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw a lot easier. But again, we're dealing with people who want to use Photoshop. All right, so this now has done a global conversion of a color image into black and white using 3 local adjustments. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click on the first, click on the last, do group, and we'll call that, oops, cancel that. I just want to rename it black and white convert. Okay, so all that does is it converts from color to black and white. Okay, and if we squint our eyes, we'll notice that we still have a lot of the same problems that we acknowledged at the very beginning. And now that we've handled the color aspect of it, now it's time to work on the luminosity aspect of it. All right, in other words, dodging and burning. And for that, we're going to use one of my favorite layer effects, and that is the curves adjustment. So from here on, curves adjustment. Can't get any easier than that. All right. So we're going to create a curves adjustment above everything, right? And now we have to start looking at the various parts that I want to target. Okay, various parts. All right, so obviously this upper corner we said was a problem because it competed too much with the brightness of a waterfall. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to darken that upper part. All right, now here is where you might want to do a little bit of experimentation on how you want to darken very specific things. And this is where kind of understanding zones come into play. All right. Now, I've talked about zones in Lightroom. You have the 5 zones: the dark, the shadows, midtones, highlights, and whites. Okay. And if you push one, you're pulling another one. It's the same thing here, except we are using a curve. All right. And if we look at the curve, we still have a lot of the same limitations that we would with with the sliders. Okay, we have our black point and our white point that are set. Our white point cannot go whiter than 100% white. Likewise, our black cannot go blacker than 100% black. So once those two are maxed out, it's not like you can take this slider and make it darker than what it is. All right. But we can take, all right, if we look at our histogram, you'll notice that it peaks into the shadows, all right, before it comes down and then peaks again into the highlights. So if we were to break this down, we have our blacks, our shadows, our midtones, our highlights, and our whites. Okay. We have this spike here. That's our sky. And yeah, pretty much our sky and the highlight areas of the waterfall. All right. Then we have our waterfall. Then we have a lot of midtones that are literally up in the upper left quadrant. Okay. And a spattering of stuff, in the bright area of the rock here. But the majority of our image is this really large spike right here, which represents all this rock. All this rock. All right. And then on the downslope, it's all the dark areas, the blacks. Okay. So hopefully you see that. So this tells me that if I want to manipulate this upper quadrant here, what I want to do is I want to reduce my whites, all right? But I don't want to, if I keep going down, all right, you're going to notice that anything that's white is now going to turn to gray, all right, which is not what we want. We want to retain a little bit of the specular highlights, okay? So if we take this and bring this down, okay, what it's doing, just like in Lightroom and what we said before, from this point, it's pulling this part down, all right, but it's pushing this part. Okay, so it's taking all our light pixels and pulling it down to make it darker. And anything below that is going to push those pixels into the dark. All right, and you can see that effect as I manipulate this curve. All right, so I have to be careful. All right, but there's 2 things here. One, we can place another point in our shadow area and bring that shadow area back up, okay, in order to control that push, all right? But we also have to understand that even though this manipulation is affecting the entire image, I am only concerned about this corner right up here. So in essence, I want to ignore all this. All right. So you kind of have to force your eye to disregard any changes that are happening in this part. I only want to see what's happening here because this is what's important to me. Okay. So I want to bring those mid-tones down. Okay. Which is essence is going to bring those highlights down. All right. But I don't want to get it to the point where it starts kind of mudding and turning into mush. All right. And the nice thing is anywhere along this line, we can put additional points. But if you start manipulating it too much, you have the potential of really getting into mush. All right. So what I want to do is I just want to look at what? The contrast. The contrast. Okay. All right. So that's looking good. I'm going to go ahead and invert that mask. Okay. And with white as my foreground color, I'm going to use a soft round brush and I'm just going to paint this area up here. Okay. And the nice thing is because we are working non-destructively, I can always come in and manipulate it a little bit more if I need to. Okay. Especially as you progress in your editing, you can say, oh, now that I've darkened this other area, this looks terrible. Well, you can go back to that initial one and you can make your modifications. Okay. So I might want to even bring that white point down a little bit. Okay. Not too bad. All right. So if I toggle that on and off, you can see how now it's really bringing the eye down into the waterfall area. Okay. All right. Another area that we recognized that needed work was this part here that kind of separated the upper falls with the lower falls. We want to bring that up. So bring another curves adjustment. Okay. And disregarding everything else, I just want to look at this. Okay. So I'm going to grab a point. All right. And I'm going to really maybe push this up. Okay. And maybe even bring my white point in. Okay. All right. Invert, Control I, Command I. With a soft round brush, white as my foreground color, I'm going to paint on the mask. And I'm just going to paint this little section here. Okay. Which now bridges that area. Okay. And you know what? Since this is already brightening it up, maybe if I go underneath the rock here and see if it does anything. All right, well, that's doing a little bit too much. Okay, I might not want to do that. So I'll go ahead and go black as my foreground color and paint that back out. All right, and that's the beauty about working with masks on these adjustment layers is we can, if we don't like something, we just paint it right back out. Okay, so. All right, there we go. All right, now we're getting a little bit somewhere. Okay. Let's add a couple little areas of color up on the rock. Or not color, color, contrast. So curves adjustment. Okay. I'm going to bring my black point down a little bit. All right. And the way you do that is you take the bottom point and you just bring it in. Okay, so basically what it's saying, anything from where is it? This point that way, it's going to turn it into black. Okay, so everything that's dark here is going to convert it to black. Okay. All right, so obviously we don't want to go too far because then, we're just creating way too much shadow, but just enough to give us a little bit of pop. Now we can do the same thing with the white point. Is if we take this and move it that way, it's going to say everything from this point, all right, from this point outward, it's going to, from this point outward is going to convert it to white. Okay. All right. So if we toggle that off and on, we can see that it's creating a little bit of contrast. All right. Creating a contrast. All right. And if we want, we can see if we can manipulate the mid-tone shadows. Not really, so I'll go ahead and delete that. All right. Invert, Control I, my mask. So always make sure you have your mask selected. My brush, white as my foreground color. All right. And I can go ahead and maybe add a little bit of that contrast in there. Okay. Very subtle. Okay, but hopefully you'll see it. All right, maybe on the top of these rocks. So anything I want to add a little bit of local contrast there, and if we want maybe punch up our midtones just a little bit. Oops. Make sure you're on your mask. All right. There we go. Okay. If we do the opposite, actually, let's see what it does. It do. Oh, yeah. I'll brush in my waterfall because it's adding a little bit of pop to it. Okay. If we want the opposite, if we want to burn down our edges, what I'm going to do is go ahead and do another curves adjustment. And in this case, we're just going to take our midpoint and we're just going to bring it down. All right. And maybe take our highlights and bring it down. As a matter of fact, you know what? We'll do it like this. We'll just take our white point and we'll bring it down. Okay. Because what I want to pay attention to is this area here and this area here, and to a certain extent along the bottom. Okay. So what it's saying is anything that has a bright pixel, I want to make it darker. Okay. But because we're not really moving our black point at all, that black point's going to stay relatively in place. All right. And just the very, very dark pixels are going to start getting darker. All right. So I can go down a lot. All right. Come back to our mask. Control I. All right. And I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. Make my brush bigger. All right. With white as my foreground color, I'm just going to go ahead and touch these areas. All right. And then just a little bit of dab, Okay. Right along the top there, right along the edge. Okay. There we go. And since this is a burn, all right, maybe we can burn some of the underlying parts of these rocks in order to give us a little bit of local contrast in there as well. Okay. And the nice thing is, you can do this to taste. All right. Anything that's going to kind of just bring the eye to where you want it and create a little bit of contrast. So take it off, put it back on. All right. We've kind of created this natural vignette that heightens the center part and it reduces the outer part. Okay. Hopefully you guys can see that. Okay. All right. Now we can use this dodging and burning with using the curves adjustments on a more refined level as well. So for example, from this view, you might not notice, but there is a fence that travels right along the top of the waterfall there, right? There's a footpath right up there. So let me go ahead and zoom into here, okay? And because that fence is made out of wood that kind of blends into the surrounding wood, you can say to yourself, you know what? I want to make that fence stand out a little bit. So now we can create very specific tasks for our dodging and burning. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and bring my exposure up. Okay. Or, you know, I might even take my black point. That's going to make it a little bit too dull. All right. I'm just going to go ahead and bring up my exposure from the center. Okay. And because we're working on this structurally, we can always go back and modify this. All right. So I'm going to make it nice and bright just to start off. Okay. I'm going to go to my mask. All right. Control I to invert, Command I. Then I'm going to take a soft round brush and I want to make sure that my brush is small, literally to the size of these the wood that makes the rails, and I'm just going to go ahead and paint it in. Okay. Now the nice thing is if I click, or I'm sorry, yeah, if I click on the beginning, press and hold my shift button and click at the other end, it's going to create a straight line between 2 points. So it makes working on something like a fence post very easy because I can click, shift, click, click, shift, click, click, shift, click, and it's going to draw a straight line between 2 points. All right, and here I'm going to do this part of the fence. All right, this part of the fence here. All right, here. All right, and I'm going to make sure that I avoid, you know, where the trees kind of overlap. Where the fence goes behind, I want to make sure that I avoid that. I just want to get the fence. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and zoom back out. All right, and now if I toggle that on and off, you're going to notice that that fence now really stands out. But of course, I went a little bit too hard on the light. So we go back to our effect, and I'm just going to drag that down until it's just slightly brighter than the surrounding trees. Okay, so we turn that off, on. Hopefully you can see that it's, let me zoom in a little bit. It's just slightly brighter. Okay. And now it makes that part of the fence kind of pop forward a little bit more. All right. All right. And we can, you know, do additional elements, you know, as far as dodging and burning. For example, let's take a look at the water. The water is definitely, I want to really keep the white part very bright. I don't want that water to look dull. All right. So I'm going to bring my white point, and I'm going to bring my white point inward, but I'm going to make sure that I don't blow too much of it out. Now, the one thing about highlights, specular highlights, it's okay to take your specular highlights and blow them out to white with no detail, as long as everything around it kind of supports it. All right. So if parts of my waterfall go to white with no detail, it's not that big of a problem, because I understand that, sunlight reflecting off of water is going to reflect the sun. So I'm expecting it to blow out. But I don't want the entirety of the waterfall blowing out, because obviously as it cascades down, it cascades into shadow. So I'm not expecting any kind of specular highlights in the shadow part. All right. Although we do get the occasional, all right, but not enough to like really blow this out. Okay. So you have to find that little bit of a balance. All right. So toggle this off and on. All right. Maybe a little bit more. All right. And midtones. Okay. And if I want to bring my shadows down a little bit, okay, maybe not too much. Maybe set my black point in. All right. Now this is doing a global effect. To do a local effect, we go to our mask, Control I to invert it. Again, select a nice round brush, soft round brush. And with white as my foreground color, I'm going to go ahead and paint in all that waterfall area. Okay. And maybe a little bit up here on the upper part here. Not so much the lower part, because I want to keep the eye up into the upper part here. Okay. All right. So Alt or Option click and make sure I get rid of any holidays. That looks good. All right. Now if we toggle off and on, we're good to go. Okay. Any questions so far? Fairly simple, right? All right. And then once you get it looking the way you want, you can go ahead and click on the top, shift click on the bottom, Control Command G to group, and we'll call this our dodge and burn. So I usually do D and B for dodge and burn. Okay. And that's before and after. All right. And you can see that our eye really travels to where I want the viewer's eye to go. Okay. All right. And then the last thing I want to do is do something with our texture. All right. So let's see. What can we try? Little vibrance. That's not going to work. How about, let's see. Where's our contrast? Let's try contrast. That's not really going to work too much. Okay. All right. So for this, what I might want to do is, because there's really, that's the one thing about Lightroom and Adobe Camera Raw. in regards to what you can do there in relation to what you can do in Photoshop is that, there are some tools within those two others that Photoshop just doesn't have. So for this, what I might want to do now is go to Adobe Camera Raw. So for that, I'm going to do a stamp layer. And what that means, I'm going to take this image with all the adjustments and I'm going to kind of burn it in. All right, so Control Alt Shift E. All right, Control Alt Shift E. It's going to create a stamp visible layer. All right, or you can do layer. What was it? Layer new. Layer from background. Something like that. I can't really remember. I'm so used to working with shortcuts. Okay. All right. And
Duck,
yeah,
Duck, is this like flattening your image, but turning it into another layer while retaining all the other layers?
correct.
Okay. And it's called stamping the layer?
Stamped visible layer. Stamp visible layer. Let's see. Yeah. I'm gonna have to figure out how to do it from the menu. I don't, so I don't know it off the top of my head. All right, but it's Control Alt Shift E for PC, and I believe it's Control or Command Option Shift E for Mac people. All right, and then once you have that, then we just go into our filter. We go to Camera Raw filter. All right. And for this, we're going to go to our effects. All right. And we're going to use texture and clarity. Right. And we're going to use, our texture and clarity. I'm going to go ahead and really pump those up. Okay. Actually, you know what? Before we do that, let me go ahead and cancel this for a second. Do I want to cancel? Yes, I want to cancel. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate. Control J, duplicate. So what I'm going to do is one is going to be texture for the rocks. So I'll label that rocks. And this one's going to be for the water. All right. So I'm going to turn the water layer, the visibility on the water layer off first. All right, I'm going to go rocks, filter, camera raw filter. All right, bring up my texture. And typically what I do, and there's no right way or wrong way. All right, but typically what I do is, let me bring this back to 0. Whatever amount I give to texture, all right, so in this case, I really want a lot of texture into rocks. All right, so let's say we do plus 20 on the texture. Oops. No, let me go plus 30. All right, whatever I give texture to my image, I'll take the clarity and give it half that. And I find that tends to give me a really nice, the best way I can describe it is a nice crunchy look to that very, very micro contrast within texture. Okay. So what I've done now is I've created a global texture on the entire image. So I made everything crunchy. All right. And you can see if, oops, let's go to this rock here in the foreground. If I turn the visibility off and on, you can see how that texture just pops. Okay? But if I want you to also pay attention to what it's doing to the water as well, and I discussed this earlier. If I add texture to the water, it's going to remove some of that that feathery, flowy feel to the water. Okay, so that's why I'm doing two variations. One for the rocks. All right, so I go ahead and say okay. All right, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a mask, but I'm going to apply a negative mask. So I'm going to press and hold the Alt key or option for you people with Macs, and I'm going to click on the mask tool, and it's going to give me a black mask. So now, with a soft round brush, white as my foreground color, what I can do is I can come into this rock that flows adjacent to the water, and I can bring out some of that texture. Okay, and I don't want texture on everything. I want it just around the water edge. Okay, because I don't, texture is another thing that can really pull your eye. All right, so I'm going to reduce the texture from areas that I don't want the visual aspect to go to on the rocks. So I'm not going to texturize everything that's rock. All right, I just want to use a little bit of texture right around the areas that butt up against the waterfall, because in the next step, I'm going to address the waterfall itself. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to turn on the visibility of my water layer, okay, which now hides everything. I'm going to go to Filter, Camera Raw Filter. Oops. Make sure you are on the image, not the mask. Make sure you're in the image. Filter, Camera Raw Filter. There we go. All right, and now I just want to pay attention to the water, okay? And if we reduce the texture and clarity on the water, all right, notice how it really makes it a lot softer looking. All right, how soft you make it at this point is entirely up to you, all right? But I want a nice contrast. Oops, not the dehaze. Okay. And again, my rule of thumb is whatever I apply in texture, I apply in clarity half that. Okay. All right. So that looks pretty good to me. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. All right. So now we have our layer with no mask. I'm going to come down to our mask, right? And pressing and holding the Alt or Option key, I click on the mask. It's going to give me a negative mask or mask filled in with black. I go to my brush, white as my foreground color, and I now paint over the water, everything that's water. Okay. All these turbulent areas right here. All right. And now let me go ahead and zoom in a little bit. Now if I turn that effect off and on, notice how it gives it a little bit more of a dreamy look. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and group these two together. Control G. I'm going to rename it to texture. Okay. Let me go ahead and close this up. All right. And if I turn that off and on, off and on. You can see how it creates a little bit of pop in this area. All right. And that's pretty much it for this black and white conversion. All right. And of course, you might want to go back and say, okay, well, my waterfall needs a little bit of, pop of brightness. You can go ahead and create another adjustment. All right, there we go. Oh, can't do it below my texture layer. I got to do it above my texture layer. Okay, because remember, we're dealing with a stamped layer. Okay, Control I, and white as my foreground color. Just go ahead and brighten up a little bit of the, there we go. Turn it off, turn it on. There we go. Okay. Any questions on, working with the underlying color and then dodging and burning and using texture to do a black and white conversion?
Yes, when you went into that camera raw, I guess I've never seen that in Photoshop before. You're going with the way you were working now.
Oh, yeah. So
does that work with the JPEG? Does that?
no.
So you have to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So Adobe Camera Raw is literally Lightroom within Photoshop. All right. It is a raw processor. All right. So it's actually, I don't know. I don't believe it can do, let me see, open, okay. Hey, recognize that? Filter, camera raw filter. Oh yeah, no, it'll do it. Yeah, it'll do it. So we can add texture, clarity. All right, yeah. So yeah, so just like Lightroom, it'll do raw, JPEGs as well. Okay. Of course, I should have known that right off the bat. I shouldn't have had to look it up, but my brain is a little fried. So, okay.
Then you get back to my screen.
The underlying color is very interesting. It's an interesting concept.
Which?
The underlying color to change.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Of course, if you have an image with a lot more color information, you can really do some drastic alterations to it. But as you saw, this particular image isn't very strong color-wise, So one of the things that you might do is before opening it up in Photoshop, if you're working in Lightroom or when it opens up in Adobe Camera Raw, is really boost up the color saturation in order to have the ability to manipulate those a little bit easier when you do your black and white conversion. Okay. Or another option is to do a black and white conversion in Adobe Camera Raw or Lightroom before going in and doing any fine edits in Photoshop. So I did this, with right inside Lightroom. And you can see, in my opinion, it's a little bit stronger of a black and white conversion. for one, I'm a lot more familiar with the tools in Lightroom than I am with the tools in Photoshop. But like I said, there are certain tools within Lightroom and Adobe Camera Raw that Lightroom just struggles with. So being able to do some of that heavy lifting within Adobe Camera Raw really can add a punch. And the thing that you'll need to kind of weigh within your workflow is if you want to do it before you start working in Lightroom or after you've done some work within Lightroom. All right, kind of like what I did with the example. Okay. All right. Any questions? Let's see.
Not so much a question, but I guess an observation about, I mentioned at the top about, I've been seeing some advertisements for black and white master classes and that type of thing in
Right.
Photoshop. Well, at the same time, I think we were talking a while back about this Clyde Butcher, black and white photographer. And I
Right.
think that
Right.
might
Right.
be the reason, because I've been following some of his photos, and yeah, black and white photography has been on my mind, so this has been pretty interesting. Plus, I want to get back to my my musical photo restoration project, which is all black
All
and
black
white.
and white. Yeah.
So I think some of these might come in handy for.
Okay, so yes. So in your particular case, because you're working with something that's already been converted to black and white, all right. So when you're
That is
scanning,
black and white, right?
right. So when you're scanning those black and white negatives or positives that you have in your collection, okay, there will not be any underlying color information to manipulate.
Okay.
All right. So at that point, it's literally just dodging and burning.
But it sounds like the curves is the dodge and burning.
That's yeah. In my opinion, it's probably the easiest, most controllable way of doing it, because as you saw, um, I'm operating off of masks. All right. So if I make a mistake with a mask, let me just pick one here. All right. If I make, actually, let me go ahead and I'm just gonna put one on top. Levels. No, not levels. Curves adjustment. Okay. Control I. I'm just gonna go ahead and I'm gonna really crank this up just to give you the idea. Okay. If I make a mistake on something, okay, I can go ahead and just using a brush on my mask, go ahead and remove that mistake. Okay. Or as I do an effect, if I say, oh, you know what, that's too much, I can always go back to the source and make adjustments in order to fit the intent that I want to give it. Okay. Now, one thing that I did not touch on here is an additional element that is available to you with all these layers. All right. And that is being able to double click and bring up the layer style dialog box, which allows you to use blend ifs. Okay. So I can say, okay, I want to target just the highlights and not the shadow areas of the underlying image. Okay. All right. So those three areas that I just did. All right. What I'm doing is let me pull this back up. I'm telling Lightroom, or I'm sorry, I'm telling Photoshop that every pixel from this point that way, I want to protect. All right. So I've increased the exposure with my curve. All right. All right. Let me back this up. Okay. Let me reset this. I don't want to get ahead of myself. Okay. So I have this area here that I am, oops, make sure you're on the mask. All right. I have all this area that I want to, you know, really dodge and add lightness to it. Okay. Let's just say, all right. But now I'm doing all this work here and it looks like crap because what it's doing is it's targeting the entire range from white from white to black, right? Okay. But I said I just want to brighten all the really, really, really bright spots. Okay. So what are the really, really bright spots? So if we go to our layer style here, okay. All right. Our current layer is our curves. All right. That's a current layer. The underlying layer is what? It's our image. Right? Okay. So what I want to do is I want to take the underlying layer and I want to apply that brightening only to a specific area. What specific area? Only the area that has the brightest pixels. Okay? So everything that is literally from our midtones to black, I don't want to brighten. Okay? So that means I now take the black slider and I bring it in, okay? And you can see the areas, all right, because I went really extreme with my brightening, okay? I can see the areas that are being affected, all right? And I just want to say, okay, well, I only want to target, you know, the really, really bright spots, all right? But the transition is very harsh. You can see that the transition is like really, really, you know, gross here. All right. So what I'm going to do is alter option. I'm going to split that point apart. And what that does is it makes my transition a little softer. So it's giving a soft edge transition. All right. And now I'm going to go ahead and if I toggle between my preview, you can see that it's not targeting any of the really deep dark shadows. And as a matter of fact, I can even say, all right, don't touch anything here. We're going to do a gradual transition, all right, to this point, and then from here to here, it's going to be 100%. Okay. All right. So that allows me to really fine tune where I want those highlights. All right. And once I say okay, there it is. And we can make our, you know, turn it off, turn it on. Okay. Just as an example. Okay. So that's another control that you have, you know, being able to utilize the layers in Photoshop, which, you know, being able to use the blend if in Photoshop is so much easier than trying to do a similar effect in Lightroom or in Adobe Camera Raw. Can it be done in those? Yeah, you can, but it's really, really, really tough. All right. There is a workaround, but it's complicated. All right. So understanding what tools are easier where allows you to really go into those areas to make your life easier when you're editing certain things. Okay. Likewise, we can take a curves adjustment and we can say, okay, I want to darken this, all right, but I don't want to target all the bright areas. All right. I just want to really darken up my shadows. Okay. And there. Okay. You might not want to do that, but it gives you that ability. All right. And like I said, the nice thing is we can come back at any point and say, oh, this one's a little bit too bright. I want to, bring it down. This one's not dark enough. I want to darken it up more. So you're able to go in and fine tune after the fact very, very easily. Okay, make sense? Right? All right. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Well, that's pretty much the lesson I have for today. Next week, definitely going to play it by ear. If you guys want to join me, I'll probably be here. It's Q&A. But I will understand if nobody wants to join me. So, all right. Okay. So anyway, don't forget. Oh, there's my color wheel. Oh, that's right. That's why it didn't work. I got to put that on. I got to put that on my other one. Where's my color wheel? Somewhere. Is it this one? Yeah, there it is. I got to copy that one. Copy that to there. Let's see. Will it do it? Yes, it will. Okay, will. Ah, no, it didn't do it. All right, anyway. Enough playing around. I gotta desktop. There it is. Now it should do it. No, it didn't. Okay. Anyway. Chat. There we go. All right. Anyway, thanks again for hanging out with me. Hopefully you guys picked up something worth your while. The black and white conversion, it's not something I cover all too often, which is unusual because, like I said, I love working in black and white. That's what I cut my chops on, back in my film days. Was definitely a lot of black and white film because guess what? It was cheap, cheaper than color film, But anyway, if I don't see you next week, have yourself a great Christmas. Hopefully, if you're not doing anything Wednesday, you can join us on the Milford Green, for our photo walk. Otherwise, have yourself a great Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, whatever you celebrate. Have a great New Year's, and we'll see you next year.
Next year.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
All righty, guys. Stay safe in the meantime.
I will. Bye.
Thank you for watching Learning Photography with Duck. Brought to you in association with Milford Photo, your local full-service camera store. Located in downtown Milford, Connecticut, Milford Photo offers you a personalized shopping experience. From the latest camera gear to printing and framing services. And, of course, educational workshops to teach you the finer aspects of photography. Don't forget to tell them Duck sent you.